Today, I want us to talk about a vast and multifaceted topic, that of morality. I want us to view the concept from Immanuel Kant's philosophical perspective. Perhaps let me begin by describing what Kant defines as not morality before we can deal with what he defines as morality. So Kant says morality has nothing to do with calculating good or bad consequences. He says morality is following a universal duty. So what Kant tells us is that morality has nothing to do with emotions or inclinations. Why is that? It makes sense because our emotions and inclinations are in the world of experience. And the world of experience is a world of matter in emotions, determined by necessity. Similarly, Kant thinks that morality has nothing to do with happiness. That means also that morality has nothing to do with goods or the good. And why is that? Because goods and the good attract our will. So we are back in the world of appearances and of the deterministic matter in motion. Finally, Kant says morality has nothing to do with consequences. So you might be wondering right now that if morality has nothing to do with emotions, with passion, with inclination, with perceptions of happiness or the good or consequences, what in the world can morality be about? Kant says duty alone has to be the justification for morality. What happens when someone sacrifices something that they want for the sake of duty? How about when someone gives up their life? I mean, like risking themselves to save someone or another person that they don't even know. Then we say that action merits esteem. That is a moral action. So Kant wants to understand duty most clearly when it's against an inclination. Duty for the sake of what Kant says, duty for the sake of a moral law in itself. Now comes the question. The question is, where do we get that moral law? How do we find it? Because it cannot be good or happiness or a law of nature. How do we know what our duties are? So Kant gives us a way to decide this. He calls it the categorical imperative. Categorical meaning there are no exceptions to it. An imperative meaning it makes a command to us. So the easiest way to say this is through an example. And perhaps let's use the example that is common to us all. Let's use the example of someone who is in a difficult situation. They are in need, they need money. The only way they can get that money is to promise to pay it back. But they know that they can't ever pay back the money. The question is, can you make a false promise when you're in need? Here is how Kant answers the question. He says, universalize that into what will be a law of nature and see if it can be accepted. He says, if this were to be a law of nature, could you will a world in which everyone could make a false promise when they were in need? Kant says, clearly not. Why? Because if everyone could make false promise in need, then all trust will break down. And the society and social cooperation will be impossible. So Kant thinks that we must somehow give the moral law ourselves in order to be free. So Kant thinks we must be self-legislators. We can't derive that law from anywhere else. We have to give it to ourselves in our practical reason. So this is the heart of Kant's autonomy. It's in the heart of the autonomy of the will. For him, freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want. He says that's just being a slave to your impulses. But true freedom is the ability to act according to the law you have ordered yourself. Here is the logic behind what he thinks we must be, why he thinks we must be self-legislators. First, rejecting heteronomy. Kant argues that if you follow a law because of an outside force, like God's rewards, social pressure, or even your own desires, you aren't actually free. You are just responding to external stimuli. He called this heteronomy, being ruled by another. The second, the authority of reason. Since we are rational beings, we have the unique capacity to step back from our instincts and ask, what should I do? When we use practical reason, we discover the categorical imperative. Third, the paradox of freedom. He says, by choosing to bound ourselves to universal moral law, one that makes sense for everyone, we prove we are independent of the physical laws of cause and effect. And that's an interesting one. So, for Kant, morality is the existence of autonomy, where being truly free means governing yourself according to universal laws derived from reason rather than personal desires or external pressure. He argues that an action only has moral worth if it is done out of duty to the categorical imperative. A rule you impose on yourself only if you could want it to become a universal law for everyone. So ultimately, to be moral is to act as a self-legislator, treating every human being as an end in themselves and never merely as a means to a goal. That is how one can summarize the concept of morality from Kant's philosophical perspective.